So our first speaker about what would success look like for WTI is Sheila Jeffreys, and over to you, Sheila.
It's good to have reached a point, I think, where we can talk about what success would look like, because in fact, this is a point at which we are winning. This is why we can now talk about what would success look like. And I'm really going to talk about, although there are many issues covered in the declaration, I'm going to talk about gender identity politics and the defeat of gender identity politics today. Now, considerable advances, of course, are being made, and we're all aware of that, and we're watching it all happen in real time in relation to several aspects of what the declaration is about. For instance, opposition to the transgendering of children and young women is progressing fast in Europe, many states of the US, in the UK and in Australia. Governments are closing down programs to mutilate children, and young women are suing the doctors who mutilated them. There's considerable success in sport too. Sports bodies are changing their policies to keep men out of women's sport, and progress is being made too in getting men out of women's prisons. So all of this is happening. The problem is that this is all piecemeal progress. And the overall problem, which is the recognition in law that men can be women, continues to exist in many countries. And whilst this is the case, we will have to continuously, endlessly fight battles against these men intruding into all aspects of women's lives and causing huge problems. And we'll have to continue doing that piecemeal in all countries. So these men are relentless, and they're constantly finding new ways to harass us, harm our rights and opportunities, and destroy the quality of our lives. This means that we need to both continue to prevent implementation of legislation that recognizes men as women, or makes such recognition easier than it already is, as in self-ID legislation, and conversion therapy legislation, which outlaws any attempt by therapists to prevent or delay treatment, which will mutilate children or adults, is still a potent threat because it will prevent therapists from helping those who've been sucked into pursuing mutilation. And it is still being promoted in many countries, including in the UK right now. So we need to anticipate and keep a sharp eye on any legislation that concerns gender identity that is proposed, and oppose it immediately and thoroughly. But we also need to campaign for the repeal of all legislation that exists to enable a recognition of men as women, and examine all legislation on equality and women's rights that has mention of female impersonators, and remove them by taking out the language of men's sexual fantasies. Now, earlier today, one of our speakers said she thought that it probably wouldn't be possible to repeal self-ID legislation, for instance, or recognition of these men in the law as women. I don't know if that's true, and that's maybe something that we can talk about, and talk about how it might be done, how we would campaign on that, because I do think that is a next stage and where we need to go. And once the laws of a country have been pruned and changed to eliminate gender identity, it is still the case, however, that transvestites will appear on TV programs and be significant in popular woman-hating culture. This was the case before the word transgender or gender identity were invented, after all. Now that we know what this social affirmation leads to, however, it is clear that there needs to be a wholesale cultural change that will make it unthinkable for a man to imitate women, to perform woman face anywhere at all. I don't know that we will have laws to make this impossible, but the way forward is to look at the way, I think, in which blackface, which shares so many features with woman face, was made socially unacceptable. We need to make it socially unacceptable for any man in any public space to imitate a woman. Blackface is so unacceptable that the women's magazine Good Housekeeping has a definition of blackface and an explanation of why it is racist. There are school programs made for the BBC which explain this to children. This is a level of success that we need to aim for. Blackface has a history, as womanface does. In a TV program in July, the black actor David Harewood looked at the history of blackface and talked about how this practice negatively affected him as a black child in the UK. Harewood is a descendant of slaves that worked on plantations owned by the Harewood family, and the tradition was to call slaves after their owners. So he has the name Harewood, as married women are called after their owners, which are their husbands. And very frequently that extraordinary practice does go on. There are women probably in this room who have experienced the obliteration of their personhood and having to take the names of their owners. Now, Harewood explains that blackface, which he calls minstrelsy, originated in 1830s US when a white man called Thomas T. Rice invented the character Jim Crow to show that black people were inferior. Rice explained that this was part of the campaign to prevent the abolition of slavery. He wanted to show the inferiority, which meant that black people should remain slaves. He came to London in 1836 to spread the message of black people as happy-go-lucky simpletons, as he calls it. And from that point onwards, there was an epidemic of minstrel groups in which white men in dress-up performed, singing and dancing, about how wonderful slavery was. They portrayed life on slave plantations as delightful. So this is, I think, reasonably, it has similarities, of course, with drag, in which men show the terrible sexualized dressing up that women have to do as something delightful. By the 1890s in the UK, minstrel groups were commonly performing in the streets of London, and shockingly, a black and white minstrel show was put on the BBC TV channel in 1958 and not taken off until 1978. I can remember seeing it myself when I was young. It was watched at its peak by 20 million people. In the early and mid 20th century, blackface characters were commonplace in movies and TV shows, with Bing Crosby, Fred Astaire, and Judy Garland all blacking up in their performances. Now these shows are gathering dust in archives, or they have been changed to edit out blackface sections because blackface is now understood to be racist. And indeed, words that are extremely derogatory of women, it would, I can't imagine them being used in a way that would show just how bad things were, as that song did. But we need to be ambitious. There was a campaign against blackface by the Campaign Against Racial Discrimination, an organization which only existed from 64 to 67. And a similar campaign could be mounted over woman face on TV. Harewood talks of seeing the black and white minstrels in the 60s and 70s when he was growing up, and how this had a negative effect on him as a little black boy. Watching drag on TV is likely to have a negative effect on all little girls as they see their inferior status mocked for fun and sexual excitement. Little girls, of course, have a bigger problem, which is that women wearing similar costumes and sexualized in the way that men doing drag are everywhere in the culture. The newsreaders wear hugely crippling high-heeled shoes, for instance. For girls, the problem of being humiliated and degraded in the culture they inhabit through seeing effeminized and sexualized women is made worse by seeing men mocking the degradation of women for their own sexual kicks. It's a double whammy. It worries me that I see many women saying that they have no problem with what men wear, just so long as they do not claim to be women. The minstrels did not claim to be black, but their performances were devastating for black children nevertheless. I hear some women say that even if drag is a problem, no one could object to pantomime dames, who in this country are men dressed as women who traditionally play significant roles in Christmas entertainment. I am sure there will be some feminists who think that the TV series Mrs. Brown's Boys is okay. That is on British TV, on the BBC. This show, which started as a radio comedy in Ireland in 1992, it's hugely famous now and seen as sort of traditional culture. It's now popular worldwide, a man called, I have never seen it because I cannot make myself see it. So I'm telling you what's in it from having read about it. I cannot watch these things. A man called Brendan O'Carroll dresses up as an old woman. He's now 68. He was obviously younger when it started. Woman place is a problem in and of itself, regardless of the what the practitioners think about what they're doing. A comedy in which a white man blacks up would not be acceptable on the TV today. Women, however, do not have the status of black men. Being not fully human, they also cannot readily be degraded, since being degraded is our ordinary condition and seen as thoroughly positive for women. Brendan O'Neill knows that what he does relates to drag, though. In the 2023 series this year, he puts in a tribute to two of what he calls drag entertainers who have died this year, Paul O'Grady and Dame Edna Everage. The question then is how to embark on campaigning against womanface so that it becomes as unacceptable as blackface. When that happens and includes all forms of womanface, drag, and heterosexual male transvestism, and whatever the men think they're doing, then I think we'll be able to claim considerable success. The practice of men impersonating women needs to be extirpated from the culture. We need to reach a position where any appearance or suggestion of female impersonation is booed, and any man who makes the mistake of doing such an impersonation loses face and is seen to have committed a serious social mistake. But there is another level of success to which we might then aspire, which is to campaign to abolish gender. When women no longer suffer from the harmful cultural practice that signify gender, then transvestites will no longer be attracted to identifying as women. The attraction of womanhood to these men is that it represents a degraded and inferior position, and therefore holds a masochistic attraction. High-heeled shoes signify pain, so they are good. Trainers and any other shoes that are fully comfortable and suitable for running, as men's shoes are not attractive to these men. It will take some time to reach this stage, where women do not wear the clothing of subordination, but it is something to aim for, and it will make woman face impossible to imagine. Thank you.